I was putting out reviews of projects and interviews of what I learned. And so people started gravitating towards that and asking me for help with what they were building. And then that eventually led to people offering to pay me for advice and guidance and strategy with NFT projects. And so I would just say, in general, if you're really interested in something and you're willing to learn about it to the extent that you can teach others, there's typically a market out there, whether you're giving it away for free or charging for it. But it's also important to know your worth. And so once you get to the point where, you've learned a ton or you've built up a big audience, people are either willing to pay to learn from you or willing to pay to sponsor you to have access to the audience that you've built.
You're listening to Lights Camera Crypto, the podcast exploring all things entertainment and Web3. I'm your host, Stephen Ladden, and this week our guest is Ben Jammin. Ben is an NFT trader and a crypto advisor, and he started his career in the world of restaurants, so couldn't be further from crypto, yet he was able to do some day trading of crypto on the side. His pursuit of knowledge and the desire to learn new things is really the backbone to Ben's success in this space. So much so that he now teaches crypto, teaches how to purchase NFTs, advises on all that stuff to artists and Web3 creators. So, really interesting story on how someone who knew nothing about the space was dedicated, learned, taught themselves, and now they're teaching other people. So, really cool stuff. Let's dive in. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. Nice to meet you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great to meet you as well, and excited to have you on. Maybe talk a little bit about your early beginnings as young Ben. Did he ever envision getting into the Web3 space? What were you interested in way back when?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to, guess what the future would be like so many years ago before smartphones were even available. But I was really into sports growing up, playing sports, watching sports. Wasn't much of a collector outside of Pokemon cards, which I think anyone who grew up around my time can say the same for the most part. But it was mostly through my grandma buying me packs and me opening it. So I didn't have money to go out collecting on my own and things like that, but it was something that I enjoyed. I wasn't really into collecting sneakers or art or anything like that, but for the most part, I had baseball cards and things, basketball cards and stuff like that. But sports and technology were really my early foundation. So I used to love playing video games, Warcraft and StarCraft and stuff like that. And I would also do some minor coding back in the day with like Visual Basic and some lower level languages. But I really enjoy tech, I really enjoy sports, and I really enjoy community. And so
Hmm.
there's definitely been a history of all those things with me, and just really happy to be here and where all my paths converged, and Web3 is where I ended up.
Sure. And so it sounds like then there was an early sort of interest in collecting and tech, as you said, built the foundation for where you are today. How did you know when you were growing up that a career in tech was possible, or when you were playing Warcraft, is that just an outlet for an interest?
It was definitely an outlet. I spent a lot of time outside playing basketball and football, but for the most part, when I was home, I didn't really know what to do with myself, but my mom always had a computer in the office and always let me use it. And so I just ended up playing games. At that time, there were definitely video games available, Nintendo, and I think the early PlayStation around that time as well. But I definitely gravitated a little bit towards I forget what kind of genre they're in now, the Warcraft style.
Sure. So
And
sort of the role playing games.
yeah, I guess so. But like I wasn't really into like Final Fantasy type stuff that a lot of my friends were. I really liked more multiplayer
Hmm.
stuff as opposed to single player, play the campaign. I wasn't really into collecting as much as it just happened by default because that's what the craze was at the time with Pokemon cards. But I always knew I would be involved in some kind of technology. I just wasn't really sure what. It's just always been one of my passions.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So early on, as you're saying, you're playing basketball and football, collecting a hobby, games, tech is just available to you in the house. It's In all of those areas, it sounds like you are just pursuing interests and eventually they all come together. What was the start of all of these kind of different interests starting to merge?
It's a little hard to say, to pinpoint exactly when, but I have always tried to stay a little bit ahead of the curve, especially regarding technology and things like that. So I actually began trading crypto in 2016. So I found NFTs maybe a year later in 2017. And so the combination of trading and trying to find something new, but also having interest in finance and economics as well, I think that kind of led to the convergence of that a little bit more because I got into crypto due to wanting to learn more about the financial system and how the dollar works. And once I heard that we lost 90%, 97% or so of our purchasing power for the US dollar since 13, I started trying to find ways to hedge against that, I guess, in a way where, Bitcoin at the time, the narrative was a little bit of a hedge against inflation and trying to have more custody over your money. And so that led to me trading things like Ethereum and Litecoin and getting a little bit bored of just the numbers and searching Google, what else can I do with crypto? And Crypto Kitties at the time by Dapper Labs is something that popped up. And we didn't really refer to them as NFTs then, but it really was the basis for how I ended up really being involved in this current iteration of what NFTs are.
So again, just to bring it back to interests, it sounds like you were, as you said, you had an interest in finance, the kind of background of the decline in the valuation of the dollar, and that led to an organic pursuit of alternative options and meandered your way through to crypto. But again, the impetus, it sounds like, is a desire to both learn and explore the space, which seems consistent with pursu- pursuing football, pursuing baseball, pursuing collecting.
Yeah, I feel like you should always follow what you love and what you're passionate about. And we were told, or at least I was told growing up, that you could be anything you want to be, do anything you want to do. And I took that pretty literally to the point where I said, okay, whatever I want to do, I can figure out a way to turn my passions into something viable for myself economically. It's just hard to say when you're playing video games that I'm going to be a professional gamer before people are being paid to game. So I love playing video games, but I didn't really see a professional path forward for that, and nor was I good enough to do anything like that. I just enjoy playing. But I think you really should follow your passions and where you find yourself putting the most amount of your time into. I feel like there's always some kind of way to benefit from that socially and financially. And we've seen with the rise of the internet and the rise of the smartphone and just having things so available to people in a way that really never was the case throughout history. You can really follow whatever passion you like. You could stream, you could podcast, you can create content, you can do anything you want to do, and there pretty much is an audience out there for you. Following that logic, I like NFTs. I it doesn't have to be just trading NFTs that you can make money from. You can become a podcaster, a content creator, get sponsorships, and figure out a way to make some money that's ethical and follows in line with your passion and what you love to do.
In on the route to or on the road to NFTs, did you collect or were you collecting professionally? What was the path that led up to the exploration of the 2016, 2017 dive into Web3 and CryptoKitties at the time and stuff like that?
I think it had to do with just curiosity and a little bit of boredom. I wasn't really trading that much then, but I was buying a little bit of stuff here and there. And I wasn't really into stocks yet. For me, it was more about here's this instrument that I could dip my toes into, right? Like, I didn't like ape all my money into it, but I was able to dip my toes in and in a way that keeps me invested, not just financially, but with my mental capacity and just wanting to follow along. And I feel like if I had a little bit of skin in the game, I would stay interested in it. And so that's essentially what happened. But instead of the route that I know a lot of people took in terms of trying to find a bunch of other different coins and what do all these different coins do and how do they interact, I went less through that path and more of just what else can I do with the coins that I have. And so that's what brought me to finding out crypto kitties and oh wow, I could buy these digital cats, I can breed them, I can sell them, I can trade them. And mind you, before that, I had been interested in something called Neopets, which I'm not sure how many people out there know about it, but it was basically like crypto kitties, but without the blockchain aspect of it. And it was browser based, and you could do similar things. So it was a little bit of a connection to me that said, this is something that I could do and potentially make money from it. And I wasn't a whale by any means or anything, but I explored it enough that when the mainstream version of NFTs came around, I was already familiar enough with the concept to be able to dive in a lot sooner than I think someone who had just found the technology. Even though I still wanted to research it and figure out what was happening and how it was different, but it was really just all stemmed from interest and I guess a little bit of tinkering,
Hmm.
figuring out I used to like to take things apart and put them back together and what's on the inside of this calculator or this Game Boy and stuff like that. Hardware and software was always a little bit of an interest for me, but I just liked being online. And as someone who is social but is still pretty introverted, do find online to be a lot of more comfort for me talking in chat rooms and hanging out with other people who like to do the same than going out to a bar.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And so prior to the exploration then of NFTs specifically, and you mentioned Neopets and stuff like that, were you involved in, career wise, were you involved in a financial position, a tech position? I guess, was the segue into the exploration of crypto and stuff like that a deviation from what you are already into, or was it more of a seamless path?
My path had a lot to do with flexibility. So I worked in restaurants for most of my professional career from I started around 16 all the way through maybe 2020 was when I stopped working at restaurants and did everything from the busboy all the way up to managing. And there's a lot of flexibility with schedule. And also, one of the things that I loved about it is it's commission based. So you get out what you put in. And I like that aspect of work in general. I think doing the hourly and you get paid this amount of hour to show up every day and do the almost the same things over and over, I felt that was pretty mundane, and for the most part, I get bored easily. So I would get bored of things like that. And being involved in the restaurant industry, I was able to really sharpen my social skills. I also learned a lot from a lot of different people. I would always be asking people, "Hey, what do you do for work? And do you like that? And how was your path?" And getting into this career, it really put me in a position to learn a lot from a lot of people, sharpen some of my skills along the way, and have the flexibility to be able to tap into some other things like crypto just through the fact that I was just able to be interested in other things. And I think there was some lack of finality. So if I was going to go down a specific path, I would feel like the rest of my life would be dedicated to that path. And just didn't really know what I wanted to do for a long time. And just being around the internet, being around websites, and being around online communities was just something that just stayed appealing to me from when I was a kid in those AOL chat rooms,
Sure.
ASL, and things like that, all the
Yeah.
way up to Discord alpha groups. And that's been what my comfort zone is. So that's why I think I just, no matter what I was doing professionally, I always gravitated back towards these type of online communities.
Got you. And so essentially the internet provided a sort of place and a playground to explore a variety of different things in a way that perhaps offline things might have been more limited or, as you were saying, more finite.
Yeah, it allowed me to leave my options open, and that's not for everybody, right? Some people know what they want to be. They want to be a doctor or they want to be a lawyer, so they know what the path is. And I just never knew what my path was. And I tried a bunch of different things, had a bunch of different types of jobs and stuff like that, but I always liked the saying, I'd rather be a jack of all trades than a master of none. So that's, or I might have butchered that, but essentially that's what I tried to do. And I tried to learn a lot of different categories of information throughout the years: finance and tech and social skills and self improvement and all that kind of stuff. They all tie into each other in certain ways. So yeah, I liked the lack of finality to where I was, but also the more time you spend in that environment and the older you get, the more finality and stability you start to want to crave. And that actually ended up happening to me, which led me a little bit more in this direction.
Interesting. So it's like the timing in a weird way, the timing of you pursuing the call it the internet path ultimately led to the stability or the finite path that perhaps you were initially like more hesitant or resistant to go follow through on.
Indirectly, actually. So what ended up happening is, I was working in restaurants and I didn't like a few things about it. While there's a lot of flexibility in it and you can make good money and stuff, you are limited in a sense to what you can actually do, and it's not scalable. You need to, if you want to make a lot more money, you have to take a lot more tables, or you have to work in much more extravagant environment, which never really played well into it for me. But I was doing a lot of serving and bartending and late hours, working 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. I wanted a little bit more stability in my life. So I had experienced a lot of that flexibility, but I ended up taking a few paths. I ended up working at a military manufacturing facility, which was almost on the other spectrum. So entirely inflexible. But
Mm.
I was starting to grow a family. I was with my now wife and we were starting to get engaged and things like that. So I wanted to have more of a standard job that's like that kind of 9 to 5 feel. And I ended up going from one extreme to the other, but that helped me to know that I appreciate the middle ground a lot more. So I was able to find a balance
Mm.
from that. And while I was working there, I was still trading crypto and involved in learning more. And that's when I started to get into some other things, and inevitably led to me jumping in a little bit more heavy into things like web design, web development, and then working on stuff like NFTs.
And so what was the tipping point of when you finally could be when you had the realization that the restaurant world was what you were going to segue out of and focus on Web3 full time? What was that? Was it a moment, a collection of experiences? What was that sort of gear shift into, hey, I think this is my new direct the playground that was once more exploring interests in providing this freedom actually is going to be the stability that I want at this time.
There was a few stops in between. So around I think 2014, I discovered daily fantasy sports, and I was big into sports and season long, and I like playing with my friends and stuff. But I discovered daily fantasy sports like FanDuel and DraftKings, and ended up doing pretty well early on. So I won some big tournaments and made some good money from it. So I ended up curating a bunch of data from all over the web for baseball and putting it together on these Excel sheets where we would make projections and ranking systems and stuff like that. And we were just putting them out for free on Twitter. And people started doing well with it. We were building a community around that, and inevitably people actually were asking us to charge for it. So it was more gated and it wasn't just available to everybody because it's a PvP atmosphere for daily fantasy sports. And so that led to us creating a company around it, me and my partner CG. And we created a company around that. and I was working on the website and working on some lower level coding languages and things like that. And so I wanted to get more of, I guess, an official foundation of my knowledge. So I went back to school. I already had my associates, and I went back to school for not a master's, a bachelor's degree in computer programming and web development. And while I was there, I created one of the first 3D printing college clubs in the country. And I was running this company with my partner called Daily Roto Sharks. And I ended up getting funding from New York State and the college that I was in, and I had my own office and stuff. And it started becoming something that I was passionate about, but not so much that I would really develop a career around, but it was something that I did while I was in school. And so when I graduated from school, I ended up selling the business and leaving the college club behind. But what the club did for me was introduce me to some manufacturing facilities, and then I ended up getting recruited to work at one of them. And so that was around, again, I think it was like 2019, 2020. I'm just so bad with dates. But I was working there for about 2 years. And that's when I was transitioning out of working in restaurants. I was working a lot of crazy hours there. And then I would go and work at the restaurant on weekends. And eventually I got promoted, starting to work a lot more there, and just really couldn't maintain working in the restaurants anymore. So as I was transitioning out of, that's when I was starting to work more on working with some websites and developing those and stuff like that. And so I was staying more online than I really had been towards the beginning of working at that job. And towards the tail end, while I was already transitioning out of restaurants, that's when I got back into NFTs with NBA Top Shot. And so, 4 months into heavily trading NFTs, I was doing so well, I was actually able to leave the jobs I was at and go into trading NFTs full time around April of 2021.
Wow, that's awesome. And so, kind of full circle then, where as a kid, you're interested in playing basketball and football, and you also have the passion for gaming. And now all of a sudden, all these years later, that kind of convergence, as we talked about before, is here or started last year, where sports and gaming have collided in a way in which you can also make a profit from. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it was great, man. I was able to watch TV, and there was a sense of gambling to it. And I've never really been much of a gambler. But the way that I saw it is you can have strategic edges, and the more time you put in, the better knowledge you gain, and that helps you in the long run. So even though there was a gambling factor to it, where you're not going to win every time, but I felt like I did have enough of an edge to do so. And I started building a community around it. And so just all these experiences throughout my life led me to the point where I am now, where again, I'm not like a master of any one thing, but I have a lot of different skills from different areas of my experience that have led me to really this great convergence that we see now, man. I just really love what I'm doing in the community and the technology and everything. And I really do see a path forward for this industry more than just what trading is, more than just flipping some JPEGs back and forth. I really do appreciate the technology that's been built here and will continue to be built. So it's just something that I've followed my fascinations, my interests, and my passions over the years, and it's led me to talking with you, bro.
Yeah, I love it. And the biggest nugget I think to take from what you just said is, again, coming back to just following your passions, following your interests, and eventually that leads, if you stick with it, to the result of that, most hopefully, but you have a greater chance of landing in something that you enjoy doing if the soup that you're making along the way is filled with ingredients of things that you like, then the output, you would think, hopefully, is something that you like, because you're not putting anything in there that you're not pursuing a path that you don't like. So the yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. A lot of it depends on your environment as well, and if you're able to. Like, for instance, if I had gotten my wife pregnant a lot earlier to the point where, like, I wasn't able to take risks and transition and leave jobs and pursue this and professional experience, then it would have definitely changed what the output was. So the fact that I do have a huge risk tolerance, that's one thing, but also I had a ton of support from my wife to be able to do. I've always had faith in myself and that will to survive and thrive. And so it definitely isn't for everybody. You have to be able to put yourself in a position where if you do take those risks that you either have a backup plan or that you're willing to go so all in, but have some cushion for yourself, right? Like, I wouldn't recommend anybody who has $0 to their name jump into something so risky, right? You need to be able to, and again, I saved a lot growing up, so I had a little bit of a cushion for myself. I didn't grow up with money. My family didn't have money, but I saved a lot personally and I worked crazy hours with restaurants. So I did have that buffer to be able to follow my passions. And I understand that's not the same for everybody. And so each person's situation is entirely different and personal to themselves. And you have to be able to be comfortable with the decision you make, or else you might drive yourself crazy.
Totally. And so there's it's almost responsible risk, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
In terms of learning more about the space and digital assets and stuff like that, and then not only learning more, you become proficient at trading them. What then is the next step to you learning or being aware of, hey, I have some knowledge that now I can start to impart to other people?
I think it's more about, again, being interested, finding what you like, and then learning about it. And the really cool thing about following your passions is that there's most likely other people out there who also follow those passions. And a lot of people don't have the time or the full on interest to be able to spend a lot of their waking hours researching into something. And so the more you learn about something, the more you're able to teach people. And so I've always loved teaching people. So I like to learn about things and share my knowledge. And that's what my social media experience has always been about. And so I was doing that last year where, from a financial perspective as well, but I really wanted to learn what project founders for NFTs were doing, how they were going about building things, what their experiences were like, what they were building as well. So some of it was from an interest standpoint, but also, do I want to invest in these things? So I was interviewing project founders, taking a ton of notes, learning about what they're doing, learning about what technology they're using, how they're doing it, how they're building communities, what goes right, what goes wrong. And I was putting out reviews of projects and interviews of what I learned. And so people started gravitating towards that and asking me for help with what they were building. And then that eventually led to people offering to pay me for advice and guidance and strategy with NFT projects. And so I would just say, in general, if you're really interested in something and you're willing to learn about it to the extent that you can teach others, there's typically a market out there, whether you're giving it away for free or charging for it. But it's also important to know your worth. And so once you get to the point where you've learned a ton or you built up a big audience, people are either willing to pay to learn from you or willing to pay to sponsor you to have access to the audience that you've built. And that's something that's pretty wide reaching these days. Everybody being able to make a podcast or have access to millions and billions of people on social media. And all it takes is really a few viral posts or genuine interest in building a community and stuff like that. And it's just something that I feel like a lot of people, even if you're introverted, it allows for people to be able to do it in a way now that you don't have to be like a Tony Robbins and have a G full of tens of thousands of people, but you can be at home in front of your own computer and camera speaking to a podcast and have tens of thousands of people listening. So it opened up the doors, this technology, it opened up the doors to people to be able to share their experiences in a way that they feel comfortable with. And I think that's really great for just society in general.
100%. You mentioned knowing your worth, which I think is a really important thing that a lot of people were not taught in school to do that in a way that makes sense from a business perspective. I'm referring to more in, say, like high school or middle school, even elementary school. Maybe there are certain, there's no class on that. And so if you're working for yourself as you are now, how do you determine what your value is? And how do you have the awareness that, okay, hey, I might be giving too much here, or I'm not charging enough here, or how do you go about defining that worth?
There was a saying by Gary Vee about jab punch. So you give things away for free and then you charge. And so I didn't even know I was like following that pattern. I was just doing it. And I would put out, like I said, the daily fantasy sports stuff for free. And then people started using it and it being successful and then asked me to charge for it. I was putting out these project reviews for free and seeing that there was so much interest from people. I started getting offers of people saying, "Hey, you've been doing this for free and you put it out, but can I pay you exclusively? We can get on calls together and you could tell me some more details specific to my project, not just like general stuff." And the more you put out there and the more interest you start to gain, the more you can charge, or at least like you see what people are offering you. You say, okay, this person offered me that. If you're going to offer me less than that, then I might not be able to do it if there are other offers. So you kind of start to get this feeling for what you can charge. And then again, my thing was always you do it because you like it and then you get paid for it. And so knowing your worth isn't about any specific dollar value, but knowing that when I first started and I did my first project review, I probably didn't know enough to charge anybody. But after doing, 10 of them, 20 of them, or whatever, you start to feel like, okay, I actually know a lot about this stuff and I can help somebody do better than if they didn't have my advice. And it's all about what do you think you're worth based on what you've been offered or what the market is out there. Would you see other people who you can compare yourself like to your peers and say, all right, I've seen this person charge that. I think I'm better than that. So maybe I could charge more, or I'm on par with that. So maybe that's a good baseline for me. So I think it's all about what you've put into it and it's not about like how much money you can get out of something, but more about what is the knowledge that you have, is that valuable to someone besides yourself? And the market will prove that. And if you get offers for something and people say, hey, we're willing to charge you $1 per hour for this, and you're like, I think it's worth more than that, and then you settle on some kind of middle ground for the most part. And after you've done that a few times, you're like, hey, like I feel like that's not enough for the value that I'm providing.
Mm.
And so again, there's no specific formula, but it's about learned experiences using competitors to gauge what you think you're worth, and just having high value for yourself, or a high opinion of yourself, I think is important, just because people who feel very poorly about themselves and don't have confidence in themselves are willing to be walked over a little bit more than people who have that kind of confidence in what they're doing and what they know.
That hits. It's true. And I think a lot of what you're saying too, that confidence, it's one hand feeds the other, because that confidence comes in a lot of cases from knowing what you're doing and knowing that you could do it well, but you can't know that you're doing it well unless you first know how to do it. So it's like a lot of
Mhm.
times, perhaps the jam up for some folks is that they want to be great at something right out the gate. But I think in any field, and we're specifically talking about Web3 technology here, but and advising, there's a patience too that I think people need to remind themselves to have when embarking on a journey to be good at anything. And it's especially hard with the technology and the instantaneous culture that we have now, where everybody wants everything today, and that includes, I think, to what we're talking about here, success.
Yeah, yeah. It's about the time you put in for yourself first, in my opinion, before you're able to really provide value to others. So If you want to be like, hey, I bought this NFT, I'm an expert now, pay me. Someone would be like, okay, how much time have you put in? What have you done? Can you show me your portfolio or who you've helped in the past? And if you just don't have anything to show for it, then just people aren't going to pay you. But at the same time, if you've put hours and you've read books and listened to articles and you're like, you know what, I feel confident in what I know is going to provide value to others, maybe I should charge for it, or maybe I should just test the waters and do some work for free to people and say, you know what, I worked with you for a few months on this. I gave you my time for free. What would you have charged for this going back? What kind of value do you think you got from me? And if they're like, nothing, you suck, leave me alone, you're like, all right, I need to work on my approach.
Yeah,
But if they're like, I would have charged you this amount of money and I would have been comfortable with that, then you have a baseline. Again, I like to do things for free first. I like to be helpful first. And then you could figure out what people are willing to pay for certain things. And I think if you just try to go about doing things the right way, and not to say I haven't burned any bridges in my life, like I've had to work on my emotional intelligence for sure, but if you go trying to do things the right way with the right intentions, I feel like that has a big impact on how people really view you.
totally. And what you're also talking about is that alignment between words, thoughts, actions. If that's coming again from a genuine good place, desire to help, coupled with it's almost like that's the sweet spot. Your words, actions, and thoughts coming from a good place, aligned with your passions. That really, at the end of the day, you can look yourself in the mirror and say, "Hey, I've done everything I can." If you're hitting that bullseye regularly,
Absolutely, man. That's very well said. And I think one of the things to pay attention to is that everybody's going to have regrets and everybody's going to make mistakes, but it's about how you learn from them and how you improve on them in the future, whether that's professionally or socially. And a lot of my mistakes have been socially. Again, I've always been, even though I'm social, I've been pretty introverted and I'm not the best communicating my feelings. And sometimes I might say something the wrong way, even if I had a good intention for it, it just might come out wrong or whatever. And the only thing you could do is just try to move forward and reflect on things in a way that you can build off of and learn off of and not take up too much mental space and focus on the negativity of it, even if it was a negative event. You choose the way that you respond to things,
Mhm.
and that inevitably changes what the outcome is.
Totally. Um, we could go on that tangent for the duration of for the rest of
Yeah.
this podcast, but I know there's a couple other things we want to get to, and but that's this is I appreciate the direction we're heading here. In terms of moving forward, though, what kind of advice do you provide to? And is it? I guess this is a two-part question. What kind of advice do you provide to folks creating Web3 projects, and is it different if it's someone creating a project versus someone creating art?
I actually saw a video the other day that really resonated with me, and it was about a kid who worked in his parents' pizza shop, and someone who was a regular came in and said, hey, listen, I forgot my wallet at home. I ordered this pie. Can you help me out? And the kid was like, no, I can't give it to you unless you pay. You have to go home and get your wallet. And the parents said, this guy is a loyal supporter. He's someone that we know. You know him, you recognize him. I think we can help him out. Because remember, we're not the ones feeding him, he's the one feeding us. And that really hit with me, and it makes sense because they're a food distributor, obviously. And so they're literally feeding him. But without loyal supporters, you're not going to eat. And so with Web3 communities, project founders, or whatever, I think it's just really important to understand that without your community, without the loyal supporters, without the people who are there to support you, you're nothing. And specifically in this industry, you have to be vocally supportive of your supporters. And so if you're able to do that, man, the sky's the limit. You can have art with no utility or utility with no art, but if you have no community, you have nothing.
So, in essence, In the Web3 world, you're underscoring the point of community by saying that the true value of anything in this newer landscape is rooted in its ability to either generate community, cultivate community, or have a community.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe Web3 is very social. I think a lot of Bored Ape's success was around the community building things and not even necessarily the Yuga Labs team. They've done some cool things, but if you look at what their community has done, it's far outpaced what Yuga has done. They've given grants to people who like Jenkins the valet who are looking to do their own stuff. And so I think that's really important. And it's something that the Nouns DAO project has done really well, even though it's not centralized in any way. They support their community, they fund their community, and to do cool things. And so that's why I said you don't have to have your own art or utility if you're going to support the community who's doing things. And it supporting them gets you more support in general because then people say, if I'm a part of that community, I'm going to be supported. So why wouldn't I want to be a part of that? So yeah, Web3 is very social.
And it's like the story about the pizza shop. It's the idea that you have people looking out for one another, which in a lot of ways, and I'm sure you've talked about this before, I certainly have. It's like the, not to say the old version of community, but there used to be a time, it's taking that community feel that we used to have in a way in smaller neighborhoods and where you know the people in your immediate environment, taking that, putting it in more of a web environment, but the same sort of ethos, it seems, is being inserted into those communities that were on a, as you were saying, in an in-person environment.
Yeah, man, I think it all comes down to just support the people who support you because we're all, every one of us is, we're on the shoulders of giants. We we have to be appreciative of the people who came before us, but we also have to be appreciative of the people who got us to where we are. And when you look at not just someone who bought an NFT you made, because you don't have to necessarily create NFTs, but someone who comments on your posts, someone who reaches out to you to say, "Hey, I appreciate what you do." I appreciate the people who appreciate me. And I would say that the same thing should go for founders. And when if you have narcissistic founders or people who are solely focused on their own gain and not the community who supports them, I think those are the ones who won't really last the test of time.
Now more than ever, the importance of empathetic founders and creators is going to be much more of a desirable quality, whether it's in art or in a project or anything like that.
I would just say when you have a project in general, and this is the theme that we're on, you're gonna have people who flip and trade and come in and out of it. But there's going to be a core group that deserves the most love. And so, what I usually preach to projects when they're saying, "Hey, I need someone for this role," say, "All right, who in your community do you think can handle that? You need a community manager who's in the Discord, always showing love and always helping people. You need a marketer. You need a designer. Who in your community can you send out an announcement saying, "Hey, we're looking for a designer. We want someone to make a new logo for us." You're not. You shouldn't go jump into Fiverr, you should go jump into your Discord and say, who has the skills for this? And try to elevate the people who support you who also can do this stuff because, what happens when you find someone to make a new logo for you and they put it out and you say, hey, this is created by this person. Steve made this logo for me. If anybody else needs that, contact Steve. And now, not only did I just put you in a position to be able to make something cool that you can be proud of that we display, but also it puts you in a position and a pipeline to get other work and other interest. And so I think that in general, you should always try to promote from within. but you also shouldn't get intimidated by someone who's getting too big, right? If you bring someone on and they're starting to outshine you in some way, you shouldn't be intimidated by that. Let's say I'm hosting Twitter Spaces daily for a project, but there's someone who comes on stage all the time and they're really well spoken. They're able to describe the project succinctly, offer them a co host spot, say, hey, would you mind running your own show for us? Maybe we'll subsidize it or things like that, instead of being like, oh, let's get this guy off the stage.
Yeah.
He's making me look bad because he's more knowledgeable about my project than I am. I think you should look to promote those people. You should look to give them value and notoriety and visibility in a way that they wouldn't be able to under other circumstances. So it's not just sending out a tweet and saying, thanks to our supporters, we love you, but hey, here's someone who's in our community doing really cool things. We would love for you guys to check him or her out, and see what they're building in the way that you could pave the way for in this industry.
Yeah. And as you said before, the doing that even within your own community helps elevate that community itself, because now that community's becoming more of a resource for people, and not only just a resource, but something where it helps increase the value of something you're already a part of by helping the people within it. So it's that continuous positive feedback loop that, to use the pizza shop example, is just it's like an upward spiral in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to understand that, and this is even just from a personal level, you can't help everybody. You can't save everybody. You can't promote everybody. There's limits, right? And so if you hold a contest for someone to make your logo, there's only going to be one person whose logo ends up winning at the end of the day. But putting the opportunity out there and people knowing that you're not just selecting from the same three people over and over, but you're giving people a chance to shine, I think is very important. And again, you have to have limits, you have to have boundaries just as a person, so you're not taken advantage of. But in many ways, it's more even about the opportunity itself and people knowing that if I'm a part of this, I can be put in that position in that situation. Because again, not every designer from your group is going to be able to be the one whose logo you choose, but people understanding that, hey, if I'm a part of this community, I'll have the opportunity to shine. And I like to remind people that stay ready. You never know when your chance is going to come. And it's one of the reasons I really love to support smaller accounts. It's why I like to come on newer podcasts or trying to make a name for themselves, because you never know. You never know who's going to blow up. You never know who's ready. And someone may have very few followers, but they're ready for the spotlight. And it just because they don't have the followers now doesn't mean they're not worthy of it. And I think that's something that's really important. And it's about the equal opportunity, not necessarily equal outcome.
In terms of said, and in terms of those equal opportunities, what can we expect from you in the coming months in terms of advising, collecting? What should we be on the lookout for from Benjamin?
I'm always collecting. I'm always trading. I'm always getting new things. I'm always trading. I love that aspect of it. But I would say the thing that I'm starting to focus on, and notice the new audio equipment, but I'm going to start doing a lot more content just generally. It's something that I've always enjoyed. I like learning things, researching things, and teaching them to people. What comes from that yet, I don't know. But and essentially, I want to put out a lot of information that's going to be helpful for people, that's going to bring knowledge to people, but also give opportunities for people to shine. And I don't have my own personal community that I've built out, but I do have plans to do something like that, build around just the content in general. And whether that's giving people opportunity to join me in sharing that content, whether it's promoting artists who are not very well known, people on the rise, up and comers, whatever. I like to use my platform to give people opportunity. And whether it's an official channel of owning a project or just saying, hey, come jump on my stream. I would love for people to hear from you about what you're doing. those are the kind of things that I think you can expect from me in the near future.
Awesome. And for people who want to check that out, where can they find you?
The first thing I'll say is follow me on Twitter at xbenjaminx. And so I have a link tree on there, and I'm going to be posting up like my Twitch that I'm going to be live streaming from, my YouTube that I'm going to be putting clips up. I post threads, and I'll probably end up doing a newsletter as well. But everything, all the information I disseminate will be through my Twitter account.
Awesome. Ben, I really appreciate the time. This has been an awesome conversation, and best of luck with everything. And again, really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Lights, Camera, Crypto, a podcast produced by Matt Bogart and Dessential Media. Music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. If you enjoyed this experience, be sure to rate and subscribe to our show and to follow @Sladden and @Dessential Media for additional content.